Hi folks, and you're very welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me today. I'm in different surroundings today because unfortunately I contracted COVID last week and I'm in lockdown for 10 days. So I said while I was actually on lockdown that I would go ahead and do a few tutorials. Now I get asked a lot of the time how I edit my photographs. So I do most of my editing in Lightroom and Photoshop. So I'm going to take you through the process here by just basically going through one or two photographs, and let's take a look and see what that looks like. So let's head in. Okay, so let's take a trip into Lightroom here, and we're going to import the photograph. I've imported these ones already. So what we will do is head into the development section. So this photograph that's here, a couple of maybe 2 months ago, I was in Killarney Lakes National Park and took some photographs there. I was after taking one photograph when I came into the forest of these set of mushrooms that were there. Different set to this, but what we're actually going to do today is go through this one. So first of all, when you're taking a photograph, I take all my photographs in RAW. So once your photograph is correctly exposed, taken in RAW, then you can pretty much do anything that you want with it afterwards. This one, as you can see here, I took that at 100 ISO. It was taken on my 50mm actually is what it was. Shows up 35 here because I have an adapter on my Canon M50 and it was shot at 2.8, and to get a bit more light into it, it was 0.3 of a second. Okay, so moving right into it. Generally what I like to do is work down along. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the profile here. I usually have just a quick look, and I usually end up in vivid, or if it's in landscape. Now the white balance should be okay. If I change it to auto there, it doesn't change too much. So I'm just going to leave it as shot. So it was correctly exposed for white balance on the day. So as I can see here straight away on the right hand side, the highlights are jumping a little, which is shown here by a little jump at the very end. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, first of all, I'm going to reduce the highlights here, pull the whites down a little bit. I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit to bring some of that back in again. We'll come back to presence because what we have here is like clarity, and see if we bring the clarity down, it makes it more of a dreamy look. But what I will do for now is I'll just pull that clarity up a small touch, and I'll offset that with the texture. We're going to actually bring the texture up a little bit as well. Vibrance and saturation will come back. Sometimes people ask me what the difference is between the vibrance slider and the saturation slider. If I was to show you here, if you increase the saturation slider to the very top, as you can see the whole photograph, the colors increase in the whole photograph. If you increase the vibrance, then all that changes is basically the contrast. So it'll increase the colors based on contrast. So we leave that for now, we'll come back to that again. Now what I want to do here is just put in a little bit of a curve, but I don't like to use this directly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pump up the highlights a little bit here, drop the light a little bit, the darks. I'm going to just take down the taste, and the shadows then as well. I'm going to bring them down a little bit as well, and I'll show you how we'll correct that again later on. So anytime you want to look at a before and after, if you want to look at the photograph beforehand and look at the photograph afterwards, the easiest thing to do is just hit Y on your keyboard. It'll show you before on the left and then after on the right. Now, so if I come down to the luminance section here, or the HSL, which is the hue, saturation and luminance. Excuse me, I'll be coughing all through this. So if you look at the overall photograph here, we're mostly looking at red, orange and yellow. That's the color scale that's actually here. So if I go into the saturation first, we don't have too much magenta, we'll pull that out. I'm going to pull the purple out, and we're going to take the blue out as well. So on the saturation side of it, if we have a look at the orange here, we'll pull that up a little bit. The yellow, just a tiny bit. And then the red, I'm just going to decrease that a little. So if I go into the hue section, I can change the orange. I'm going to make it darker, pushing away from that yellow. The yellows that are in it, if I push it up here, it's going to change them towards green. So we don't want to change that too much. And the red, I just lower it a little bit. Now on the lumen side of it, what I'm going to do is take the greens down a little, orange up a little, and the yellow up a little. Just go back into the saturation, and what I want to do is pull that yellow out. Okay, so the hue, saturation, and then that luminance. Okay, so normally what I do a lot of the time, you'll see magenta and purple be pulled out of photographs because we're not using it too much. So just down to the sharpening. So when I took this photograph, what I actually did was, because it was at 2.8, I was focusing in and around this area here, which is the reason why, because it was up close. These ones up top are actually they're a bit faded, so they're out of focus because it was a close-up shot taken at 2.4. So what I'm going to try and do here is, if I move this, oh come on now. Okay, in the sharpening, why isn't that moving? Okay, so we're going to go roughly about, I think this is where I was focusing, around this area. So when I want to sharpen is, I'm just going to sharpen that up a little bit more. As you can see, it'll get sharper. The radius of it, if you hold down the option key, you'll see what it affects when you're doing that. So, and the detail, we just want it to be more detailed. And this generally with these 4 sliders here is where I end up. They normally fall in this spectrum. 1 and 3 are pushed to this side, and 2 and 4. So if you hold down, again, hold down option on the masking slider, you can see what it's going to affect. It affects more of the photograph here. But what I really want to do is just sharpen certain areas, and that's what you can see in this. Okay, so noise reduction. I'm just going to add in a little bit of noise reduction. We don't have too much in the shadows because it was taken at 100 ISO. Now I always turn on chromatic aberration and the lens correction profile as well. If you see, when you turn on the lens correction profile around the bottom areas here, what it'll do, it'll correct the lens, but it'll also take some of that vignetting away. But we might need to add some vignetting later on, so we'll come back to that again. I don't need to adjust or transform the leveling and stuff like that, mostly used when you do landscape photography and stuff like that. So one thing I will do is I'll go back up to the crop area that's here, and what I want to do is I want to change this to a 4x5. Now it's cutting off a little bit here at the end, but I won't worry about that for right now. So that's a little bit better because we don't need a space at the top and the bottom. So we just hit enter on that. So again, back into the Y, before and after, we can see the difference in that already. So now what we're actually going to do is, this is the section that I prefer for changing stuff around. Now, right here we have the mask section, and currently this is Lightroom Classic 11. So we're on Lightroom 11, and they've introduced some fantastic changes in Lightroom 11. So the new masking section that's here, and selected by selecting a subject. So as you can see, the main subject that's in the middle here, is these mushrooms or fungi. So if we hit on select subject, this is so accurate now, it's unbelievable. So what it's actually going to do is going to pick out the main subject that's there, and for the most part it's selected a whole lot of, I mean, that's incredible. So what I'm actually going to do first is, if I go down to subject here, that mask where it has selected it, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to invert it, because I don't want that, I want to invert it to pull out the other part of it. And I'm going to bring the exposure just down a little, because I want to darken up that area there, it's the back. Increase the contrast a tiny little bit, and we're going to drop down those highlights again. Shadows, we'll pull them down too. Now we could take the blacks the whole way down, but we won't. I'm just going to barely touch on them. So as you can see, there's a huge difference there straight away. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in again, and I'm going to again select subject. So I wanted to pull out that all the mushroom area again. And bear in mind, we have the background. We already inverted it the first time. This time we won't with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase the exposure a tiny bit. Highlights, I'm going to maybe pull to here, and the contrast I pull up a bit. So now you can see these highlighted areas are starting to pop out a little bit more. The whites will just drop slightly. I'll take that up another little bit. Okay. So again, back to Y, see the before and after, the difference in that again straight away. So that's making, for me, that's making the focal point that's actually in this photograph pop a little bit more, so your eye is drawn towards that. So this time what we're going to do now is we're just going to make that happen a little bit more. So generally what I'm seeing is this area here, as you can see, which is kind of like a little bit of a V, that's where my eye is drawn to at the moment. So that's kind of really where I want to focus. So I'm going to go back in, I'm going to put another mask on, and I'm going to do linear gradient. And what I'm going to do is just pull one down here on this side. I'm going to pull that exposure just down slightly like that. Now what we can do is we can go in and adjust this as well, bringing it down a little bit more, turn it. And again, like I said, this is just what I'm seeing with my eye at the moment. Now what I'm going to add is I'm going to add another one, linear gradient. Because what I'm trying to do is just accentuate a bit more what I'm seeing. It's like a little triangle here. So if we come out of masks, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in, and I'm just going to increase a touch on the exposure again, maybe increasing the contrast a tiny bit. So now I'm going to come back down here to the clarity. Dehaze here is something that you have to be really careful of. Like I said, if you drop it here, you know, it can really be extreme. So the more you bring it up this way, as you can see, it's a nice tool to have with the presence and stuff like that. Okay, so we're starting to get there now again. So what I basically want to do now is I just want to come back to the vibrance, and I'm just going to increase, see where that's going to be, increase the vibrance up a little, but we'll take saturation slightly down. Okay, so there we have now the before and after, which is a complete difference. So that's what you can do basically when you're working with a raw photograph. So I might just again come back up here. I'm going to use the brush tool this time. I'm going to bring down the exposure, which is just going to accentuate it a little, or just to overdo it first. I'm going to kill off these areas here. No. I'm just going to darken that up here right on the edge so that your eye is taken away from it. Okay, so there we have it, a before and after. And actually I think when I'm looking at it now, I'm going to go back, come out of the mask area, I'll come back down to the HSL, and I'm going to go into the hue. I just want to push them a little bit more that way, away from the yellows. Yeah, that looks nice now. So you can see the focus on this center area here. Your eye is now drawn to that. So there you have it, folks. This is how I go through Lightroom, how I take my photographs from raw out of the camera and basically process them in Lightroom, sometimes in Photoshop. Photoshop I use mostly for touching up, maybe for fixing up the photograph as opposed to coloring and getting the look of the photograph. So I hope you enjoy that. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I do hope to do more of these tutorials that will be coming again in the near future. So thanks very much for joining in, and I'll talk to you all again very, very soon. Thanks a million.